bookish friends, my name is Jackie and welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to dive into 10 historical fiction book recommendations. So historical fiction is one of my all-time favorite genres, and I know that it's a genre that some people have a hard time getting into. These 10 recommendations are ones that I absolutely adore, and I hope that you will give them a go and try them out, because I think that they will help you get into the genre if this is something that you struggle with, or if you're a seasoned historical fiction reader like me, you might enjoy getting some new recommendations. The first book that I want to recommend is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. This takes place in the 1930s, and we're following Jane Crawford as she starts to become her own person. We follow her as she's trying to figure out who she is, and she's going on a journey of self-discovery, trying to figure out what her identity is. She goes through 3 different marriages, and it goes into a journey of her roots within the story. This book is also considered a classic, as Zora Neale Hurston's writing is incredibly well done, and she is considered a classic writer. This is a very quick read at just under 300 pages. So many different things still happen within the story, and I really found myself in awe of Jane's perseverance throughout the story. She has so many things happening in her life and such a hard time, yet she finds the determination to keep pushing through in life despite all of the issues that crop up for her. She's a lot stronger than a lot of the men give her credit for in this book, and at the beginning I could see how she was grappling between her love for her grandmother and also her frustrations at her grandmother's misguided marriage match for Janie. So Janie's really split between her grandmother's expectations for her life but also wanting to be happy in her own right. And all of her husbands really irritated me, especially because they had a lot of extremely misogynistic behavior. Again, this story is taking place in the 1930s, so this is to be expected, but it was still frustrating nonetheless. Her first husband is a farmer, and he only really sees Janie as a piece of property that he owns, so he's pretty irrelevant to a majority of the story. The most important part of their marriage is that Janie was incredibly unhappy in it, and she was desperate to escape this life. So when she meets another man named Joe Starks, this very ambitious man wants to become her second husband, and she quickly realizes that he just wants her to be a trophy wife, and he wants to control her because he wants to hold a great deal of power, and she finds that he's even more frustrating than her first husband was. And I'd say that her third husband actually treats her the worst of all 3 of them. He really feels the need to control her in a way that the others 2 didn't, but I thought that the way that each of these 3 husbands were described, the way that their details were outlined within the story was very well done, even if they irked me as characters. And I was really surprised to find out that most of the novel took place in Florida, which is my home state, and I thought that this was pretty cool. The climax of the story happens in the late 1920s, but a lot of the story is being told from the future perspective in the later 1930s, and this story is geographically so close to home, but it feels like such a distant story because so many things have changed in the nearly 100 years since this book happened, and it makes so many of these things unrecognizable and foreign to me. There was a lot of overt and prominent racism and discrimination addressed within this book, so keep that in mind if you're interested in checking it out, and it makes sense for the time period in which it was written. However, hearing some of the racial slurs that were being said in this book made me very uncomfortable, and it's reminded me of how far we've come as a society, but it also reminds me of how far we have yet to go, and that racial-based discrimination is still very alive even in the modern day. Slavery is mentioned a few times in the book, especially because Janie's grandmother was born as a slave, so that's another important thing to note about it. I thought the writing style was really well done. I absolutely love how the story comes to a full circle, with the very beginning being focused on Janie as she's recounting her life, and the ending of the book finishes where she tells her childhood friend this story. So we really get to see the full arc from the beginning to the end. There are a lot of interesting and fascinating metaphors used throughout the story, and some interesting slang which can make this a little bit more of a difficult read. However, I still think that it's a very poignant one and one that I highly would recommend. It didn't take away from the story in any major way, and the book was definitely a little bit slow paced in some areas, but there was still enough going on within the plot that it made you still feel engaged within the story. I would definitely say that if you're interested in reading this book, go with the audiobook. I listened to the audiobook from Libro.fm, so thank you so much to them for giving me an audiobook copy of it, but I just really enjoyed how the narrator told the story. I think that really enhanced the experience, and I felt more connected to Janie and her struggles that way than I think I would have if I had physically read it or read the book as an ebook. So that's how I recommend seeing it. I got so much more out of the story in this format, and overall this is a historical fiction that I would really recommend recommend. And I can't really attest for the accuracy of the representation in this book, but if you're interested in learning more of that, you can look into some Own Voices reviewers' thoughts. My next recommendation is for The Red Tent by Anita Diamond. This is a biblical retelling and it's following Dinah's story. In the Bible, there's only hints about her life within it, and it's only in a brief and violent detour within the book of Genesis that this happens, and that's really more focused on her father Jacob and his dozen sons. So this story is really being told from Dinah's voice and her perspective, and it reveals a lot of the traditions of ancient womanhood and the world of the Red Tent. It starts by telling the story of her mothers, of Leah, Rachel, Zilpah, and Bilhah, the 4 wives of Jacob, and they love Dinah and give her a lot of gifts that help sustain her through her youth and her calling as a midwife. These things also sustain her when she goes to a new home in a foreign land, and we really feel connected to Dinah's story in this time period. It has very rich storytelling within it, and I think that it's very interesting that it takes place so far in the past. Just the way that the society was run at that time was incredibly different from how it is now, but you can still see some similar themes that relate to the modern day. Learning about the Red Tent and the entire process of that was incredibly intriguing to me, and I think that this is one that historical fiction lovers will really enjoy in particular because it's a little bit different. I haven't read a lot of historical fictions that takes place in this time period, and I think it's really intriguing to see these events from a woman's perspective. Just getting to see the world from her eyes and her trying to navigate the traditions of the Red Tent, of what a woman is expected to do within this society, was incredibly interesting to me and one that I still highly recommend. The Red Tent is one that has stuck with me for a very long time. I read this years ago when I was in school, and I still think about it from time to time because it was that memorable for me. So if you're looking for like an ancient story that's told from a woman's perspective instead of a man's, and you want like an alternative lens to ancient history and the past like that, I would highly recommend this one. My next recommendation is for The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This is a more recent historical fiction read for me, and it's one that I read in the month of June, but I fell in love with the story. It did make me sob quite a bit, so keep that in mind when going into this, but it was really good. It's set in 1939 France, so this is when France is occupied by the Nazis during World War II, and we're following the story of 2 sisters, Vian Mauriac and Isabel. Vian is trying to just keep her family together. She's trying to keep her normal life running while this war is going on, whereas Isabel is the more rebellious sister. She gets involved with this secret rebel group within France that is trying to fight against the Nazis, and there's a lot of intrigue that goes on with her storyline there. Vian's story does take several turns as well, so it does get very intriguing there, and it's such a deeply powerful and very well written book. There were so many surprising events throughout the story that just kept me guessing, and I definitely gasped while reading this one several times. It is heartbreaking, and just the ending really destroyed me. It was such a gut punch, but very beautifully written. We also get some chapters that are told from a future perspective, so it takes place in like the 1990s or something like that, I believe. So this is many decades after the end of the war, and we're following this perspective of one of the 2 sisters in this future timeline, but we don't know which of the sisters it is, so it does keep you guessing in that aspect as well. I thought that Kristen Hanna just really made you feel connected to Vian and Isabel's stories both equally in this, and you really feel for them and their journey throughout this. There's a lot of themes of just family and trying to connect and find your identity within this one, and also just the difficulties of ordinary people trying to live through the war. I love how we get a female feminine perspective to what it was like to live through World War II, as so many historical fictions really focus more on the battles or the men and what they were up to. So I like that Kristen Hanna framed this from the view of a woman's perspective. The Nightingale is just a book that will stick with me for a really long time. I enjoyed this book so much. It was well crafted and one that I highly recommend. The prose and the narrative of this was so unique, but in typical Kristen Hanna style, and I would say that if you're interested in historical fiction, this would be a good book to get started with. I did a buddy read for this with Isabel from Isabel Reads 0314, and I will leave her channel link below, but she is not a big historical fiction reader, and even she felt connected to the story, so I think that this would be good for veterans of the genre of historical fiction, but also new readers. My next recommendation is for The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. This book has also been out for a while, so this is an older recommendation, and I did read this when I was in school, but I just found it to be so memorable that I needed to share it now. It's a heartbreaking story of the friendship between a wealthy boy and the son of his father's servant, and it's such a beautifully crafted novel. It takes place in Afghanistan, and it takes place over 30 different years, so it's a sweeping story across several decades. I just think that The Kite Runner is such a powerful story. It's become a modern day classic at this point, and it is a story of portrayal of redemption and the power of reading and the exploration of this power dynamic between fathers over their sons. There's a lot of discussion of love and the sacrifices that we make for those that we love within this, as well as lies and the secrets that we keep. I think the Kite Runner was really well written and executed. I felt really connected to both of the boys' story within this, and I highly recommend it so much. If you haven't read this book, you definitely need to. It's a classic for a reason, and I just think that you would really enjoy it. This is another one that I think would be accessible not just to veterans, but also to newbies of the historical fiction genre. And if you're looking for something that is a little bit different outside of the typical historical fictions, which often take place around World War II, I think that you would really get a lot out of this book and appreciate it. There are so many themes and lessons that can be learned from it, and I highly recommend it. If you're looking for a longer series to delve into for historical fiction, I recommend the Poldark series. So the first book is Ross Poldark, and this follows a British captain who fought in the Revolutionary War, and he's now returning to his home of Cornwall after the end of the war and the British have lost. And he is looking forward to a joyful homecoming with his family, but he finds that life is not how he left it before the war, and his home is in disrepair, his father is dead, and the woman that he was promised to, Elizabeth, is now engaged to his cousin, and so his life is basically in ruins and he's trying to put the pieces back together again. He doesn't know what he's going to do because the mines on his family's property are basically derelict. So the first book is focused a lot on him trying to lift himself up out of this poverty and try to resurrect his family's mines, while also just looking for how to move forward within society and carve a new place for himself with how things have changed over time. It's a really beautiful, sweeping story that takes place over several decades, and I love this series to pieces. This has a fabulous adaptation that was created in 2015, which I also highly recommend. It was a really great PBS series, but the books were even better. I will say the first several books were the best, like the first 5 or 6 were amazing, and then it does go a little bit downhill from there, but I still love the story as a whole. Just the saga of sweeping characters, and the Poldark family is one that you really come to feel connected to. Some of the other characters that appear, like Demelza and the servants and the villagers, are ones that you really feel for, and you really get to see Ross as he's connected to these people within his community that he feels responsible for, so that's really beautiful to see. He is close with all of his tenants, and just seeing him navigate society from the perspective of the lower class, but also from the middle class, or the gentry class as it was known at the time, and seeing how he fits in with both worlds is really interesting. He has a lot of character and he does make a lot of mistakes, so he's a flawed hero, but you can't help rooting for him, and this series will just forever remain one of my all-time favorites. If you're like me and you sometimes want to read a longer series rather than so many historical standalones, I would highly recommend this one. My next 2 recommendations are ones that I think would go really well together. So the first one of these is The Farming of Bones by Edith Danticott. So this story takes place in 1937 in a village near the river in the Dominican Republic, so it's close to the country of Haiti as well. And we're following Amabel Desir, who is a Haitian-born person. She is a maidservant to a Dominican family that took her in when she was orphaned. And we are also following her lover, Sebastien, who is a sugarcane cutter, and they decide that they want to marry and return to Haiti at the end of the cane season. However, hostilities against the Haitian laborers in the Dominican Republic are mounting, and they find a spokesperson in General Trujillo who decides that he wants to do some ethnic cleansing in the Dominican Republic and make it more of a Spanish country. So they're trying to get rid of the Haitian people and they're persecuting them. There's a lot of rumors of this going on, and this becomes a fact, and this leads to a lot of anxiety and terror for both Amabel and Sebastien, and their dreams are kind of whittled down to just survive and endure through this. So this story is based on true events that happened within the Dominican Republic, but it's not often discussed or talked about, especially not in historical fiction novels. And the book is basically a memorial to the forgotten victims of this nationalism and the deeply felt passion and grief that are felt by the survivors of this situation. It was a really difficult story to read, but still one that I highly recommend, and it tells this history that isn't often talked about, which I think is important to remember and recall. So definitely a historical fiction that I would really recommend, even to new readers of the genre. This is definitely one that will keep you gripped and guessing all the way throughout, and the atrocities that happen in this are really hard to read about, but it's important to keep these things in mind and to never forget them to prevent it from happening again and again in other situations. Edith Danticott just really had a beautiful way of writing this prose, and you can really feel and connect with Amabel's fear within this story and Sebastian's as well, and you can see them being whittled down from having all these big dreams to just wanting to survive through. This is similar to the Nightingale in the sense that they kind of forget what life is like before the situation. So the Nightingale, it's World War II, and with this, it's before this mass persecution, but they have to try to find a way through, and it really shaped a group of people and defined their lives. So a very important and impactful read. My next recommendation also goes hand in hand with The Farming of Bones, and that is for In the Time of the Butterflies by Julia Alvarez. This is also taking place in the same time period, and we're also following this time period where General Trujillo is in control of the Dominican Republic. But this is more from the Dominican perspective and not from the Haitian perspective of the story, and it's set in the waning days of Trujillo's dictatorship in the DR in 1960, and we're following the Mirabal sisters. They are young wives and mothers who were assassinated after visiting their jailed husbands. It is a tale of sisterhood and courage, and it's set after the rise of Trujillo's dictatorship. It blends fact and fiction within this one, and it is really inspired by the true story of the Mirabal sisters, just like The Farming of Bones is based off of a true story. So they were murdered in 1960 because they were part of an underground plot that was trying to overthrow Trujillo's dictatorship and his government. They were known as Las Mariposas, or the Butterflies, which is in the title right here, and we get to see them growing up through their teenage years and their gradual involvement with the revolution and how the rebellion is later uncovered within the story. It is beautifully written. I really connected to Julia Alvarez's writing within this one, and I highly recommend this story. It has so many mounting tension throughout, and you really don't know how the story is going to wrap up. We are being told all these stories from Dere, the fourth sister. She is the only one that survives this time. Dere fears abandoning her routine and joining her husband in fighting against this government, and she is very reticent about doing this. But we also get the perspectives of her other sisters. So Minerva is very brave and outspoken. She's a very bold character, and I really thought that she was quite audacious, but in the best ways possible. We have the family's ringleader, who is the pious Patria, and she forsakes her religion to join her sisters after she witnesses some of the atrocities being caused through this tyranny. And the baby sister, Maria Teresa, who chronicles in her diaries her allegiance to Minerva and the physical and spiritual anguish of prison life. So we get all of their stories within this book, and we're being told it through Dede's eyes and her lens on the story, but it's very deeply moving. I thought that each of the sisters had really interesting motivations, and they were all unique, but they were united under this cause. And I think that one of Dede's regrets later on in life was that she felt scared to join her sisters in this rebellion, so you also get that exploration into her regrets and her grief over the whole situation. It's beautifully well crafted, and I highly recommend this. I cannot say enough good things about Julia Alvarez's writing within this story, and you should definitely pick this one up. My next recommendation is for The Gimlet Slip by Fiona Davis and Greg Wands. This I listened to the audiobook of, and it takes place in 1933 New York. So this is in the second decade of Prohibition. And basically the citizens are desperate to get alcoholic drinks wherever they can. They're like getting into moonshine and a lot of illegal substances that are being manufactured at this time. So we're following a young woman who gets pulled into a dangerous bootlegging scheme in this thrilling novella. Lydia Gardner is an infamous queenpin in a criminal empire. From her penthouse in New York, she deals with all the city's favorite vices. This includes illegal liquor, drugs, women, and she has a cold heart, an iron fist, and a knack for besting her male counterparts. And Jo Hayes is an impulsive young woman who decides that she wants to forge a life as an auto mechanic, but instead finds herself being drawn into Lydia's orbit and into this illicit world of selling illegal liquor. And Lydia takes Jo under her wing, and they get pulled into a daring heist which might bring down the city's biggest bootlegger. But they have to do this while trying to escape the watchful eye of an up-and-coming NYPD detective who has a score to settle. The two women flip between billiard halls and glitzy soirees and the seedy underworld, and they soon learn that nothing is quite as it seems. So there's a lot of hidden agendas kind of in this, and our main character, Jo, kind of gets thrust into this life and into this bootlegging and stuff when this is not something that she had ever dreamed of or aspired to work in. And we also get a lot of insight into Lydia's character, especially towards the end of the short novella. I don't really want to say too much about this because it is a very brief, quick read. If you're looking for a historical fiction that's just quick and fast-paced, this is definitely one that I would really recommend. And I think that this would be great for people that are new to the historical fiction genre and want to dip their toes in because it's so short and there's a lot going on within the story, so you'll never feel bored or disconnected from the characters. I just love how it was told, and the narration was done really well. I felt really connected to the story and I enjoyed it a lot, so I highly recommend it. If you're looking looking for another historical fiction series to sink your teeth into, I recommend the Plantagenet and Tudor novels by Philippa Gregory. There's like 12 or 13 of these in the series, and they're all following different women in the time of the War of the Roses and a little bit in the aftermath of that. So the first woman that we follow is Jaquetta Woodville, who is going to be the mother of the White Queen, and they have made some adaptations based off some of these books. So there is a limited mini-series for the White Queen, who is Elizabeth Woodville in the time of the War of the Roses. We also have a limited series on the White Princess, who is Elizabeth Woodville's daughter, and she is married to Henry VII, and infamously is the mother of Henry VIII as well. And we also have a series on the Spanish princess, and this is following Catherine of Aragon. That is one of the later books in the series, but all of these books follow these women in this historical context. It gives you a very feminine forward lens and mindset towards seeing how the events of the War of the Roses played out, and you get to see the power players and figures behind some of the men making the decisions and battling. So there's a lot of political intrigue and excitement in all of these stories. There is also a lot of war and battle being depicted in each of these books, because obviously it's all these people that are fighting each other and warring for the crown of England. And I just thought that these were engaging, especially the first few. I would say like the first 6 or 8 are my absolute favorites. The series does tend to go a little bit downhill the further on we go, and the last 3 books I just really didn't enjoy. But of these 16 book series, 8 of them were really good, and I thought that they told some really unique stories. We get some alternative perspectives, so we do get some very important political figures such as Catherine of Aragon, Elizabeth of York, Anne Boleyn, and all of those characters. But we also get a story focused on a servant that works within Elizabeth I's household during her reign, and we get Mary Boleyn's perspective, who is Anne Boleyn's sister. So we get some of those alternative perspectives, which makes these stories unique and different. So if you're looking for something longer to dive into, I recommend these. And then if you enjoyed this, I also recommend watching the adaptations that have been made of it, because some of them are really good and I just really enjoy these stories overall. There is so much scandal and betrayal happening in these stories that it will keep you second guessing the whole time, and there's really no limits to what these characters will do because of the time period that it's set in. Alright, and then last but most certainly not least is Fever 1793 by Laurie Halse Anderson. I know that Laurie Halse Anderson has some other really famous works, and she is known almost as a modern day classic writer, but I really want to recommend this book because I think it's not one that's necessarily talked about a lot with her backlist. And it takes place in late summer 1793 on the streets of Philadelphia, as they're abuzz with mosquitoes and there's rumors of a fever spreading. And down near the docks, many people have taken ill and fatalities are mounting. This includes Polly, who is the serving girl at the Cook Coffee House, and 14-year-old Maddie Cook doesn't get a moment to mourn the passing of her childhood playmate. New customers have overrun her family's coffee shop, and it's located far from the mosquito-infested river, so her concerns of fever are overshadowed by dreams of growing her family's small business into a thriving enterprise. But soon the fever strikes closer to home, and her struggle to build a new life must give way to a new fight, trying to fight to stay alive. This is a really interesting story, and it does follow a plague, which I think can be intriguing, but especially in the light of the COVID pandemic and the aftermath of that, I do recommend caution when diving into this. I think it's really interesting to learn about this stuff from Maddie's perspective and really seeing how she doesn't think that it's going to affect her, which is similar to the perspective and thoughts that a lot of us had before the COVID-19 pandemic spread. I know that many of us didn't think that it was going to impact us, so it is something that we can relate to for sure within this story, and I just thought that it was really well written. It's great for younger audiences and for people who are new to the historical fiction genre because it uses a lot of accessible language, so I highly recommend this one. If you're looking for something that's a little bit lighter and quicker read, maybe a young adult or YA novel, I would recommend this book for sure. Alright, so that's gonna be all the recommendations for this video. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, comment, and subscribe. Have you read any of these books, or do you have any other historical fiction recommendations for me? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Wherever you are in the world, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, I hope that you're doing well, and I'll see you for another one soon. Bye!